In the heart of Mississippi's Delta, there once stood a town. The maps forgot, a place locals whispered about, but never visited after sundown. It was called Belle Haven, though even that name faded under layers of silence and swamp fog. Before the Civil War, Belle Haven was known for two things: its vast cotton fields and a physician whose reputation seemed too good to be true, Dr. Silas Granger, a man hailed as a visionary healer who promised freedom through science. To the wealthy plantation owners, Granger was a miracle worker. He treated fevers, amputations, and childbirths with a cold precision rare for his time. But to the enslaved, his name carried a different weight. Whispered only in the dark, the man who traded pain for power. Granger arrived in Belle Haven in 1838, a northern-born doctor with a fascination for anatomy and the limits of human endurance. He purchased a small estate at the edge of the swamp, where he set up his medical school. There, he claimed to be developing cures that could liberate mankind from sickness. Yet the locals began noticing strange wagons arriving at night, chained men and women covered in burlap, escorted by armed men who disappeared by dawn. By 1842, several enslaved workers from nearby plantations had vanished without a trace. Their owners were told they had succumbed to fever, but whispers told another story, that they were taken to Granger's estate, where screams could be heard deep into the night. The air around his laboratory smelled of burnt hair and sulfur, an odor the swamp seemed to carry for miles. Decades later, after the Civil War, federal surveyors stumbled upon the ruins of Granger's property. Beneath the collapsed timbers, they discovered what the newspapers of the time called the Room of Shadows. Inside were glass, jars filled with preserved human organs, crude surgical tools, and hundreds of sketches, bodies dissected and rearranged like broken puppets. The papers speculated that Granger had been performing experiments to improve the human body, but the truth was darker still. According to fragments from Granger's own journal, he believed that pain was the gateway to the soul, and that through suffering, one could separate the mortal shell from what he called the divine spark. His goal was nothing, short of alchemy through medicine, to manipulate the boundary between life and death itself. But Belle Haven didn't just fear him for his science. They feared him for what he promised. Granger claimed he could make men immortal. Some say the plantation owners who funded him believed it. Others claimed he had already succeeded, but at a terrible cost. When the town burned in 1863 during the war, the swamp swallowed the last remains of Granger's house. His grave was never found, yet even now hunters who wander too far into the bayou tell of lantern lights flickering in the mist and the faint sound of someone whispering, "Freedom through science." Nearly a century later, in 1957, a team of surveyors from Jackson stumbled upon the forgotten site while searching for oil. What they found would reignite Mississippi's most horrifying ghost story. Deep in the mud, preserved by time and decay, lay remnants of what could only be described as a field hospital for the damned. Rusty chains still hung from the rafters of what was once Granger's cellar. Beside them lay bones, human but malformed. Some skulls had been cut open and resealed with iron plates. Others had strange incisions, as if someone had tried to correct nature's design. When news of the find reached the Jackson Herald, the editor dismissed it as Civil War relics. But one reporter, Evelyn Carter, refused to let the story die. Carter, a young journalist from the University of Mississippi, traveled to Belle Haven's ruins and began interviewing descendants of those who had once lived nearby. She recorded haunting testimonies, tales passed down by enslaved families who escaped before the war. They spoke of a doctor who made people vanish, and of voices that begged for mercy long after they died. Among the artifacts recovered was a half-burned ledger. Bearing the initials SG inside were dozens of entries, lists of names, dates, and cryptic remarks. Subject 12, lost consciousness at 11:45, soul separation incomplete. Subject 24, displays signs of retained awareness post-mortem. The ledger became known as the Granger Book, and though many dismissed it as forgery, modern handwriting analysis later confirmed its authenticity. Carter's research revealed that Granger had received financial backing from several prominent Southern families, men who believed his work could find a scientific solution to human hierarchy. They saw his experiments not as horror but as progress. When Carter tried to publish her findings, her article was suppressed. The newspaper cited lack of evidence, but colleagues later claimed men in dark suits visited the office that night. Within a month, Evelyn disappeared. Her car was found abandoned near the swamp road leading to Bellhaven, her notes missing. Her recorder smashed. Locals whispered that she'd joined the souls of Granger's victims, taken by the same fog that had swallowed his house. In 1989, an elderly man checked into a rural hospital outside Vicksburg. He called himself Dr. Samuel Green but had no identification, no medical license, and no next of kin. The staff noted his archaic speech and unsettling calm. When asked his age, he smiled and said, "Older than my body remembers." He spoke at length about the bridge between spirit and science, describing experiments, eerily similar to those in Granger's journal. One nurse later told reporters, "He said pain wasn't punishment, it was translation. That through pain he'd seen eternity. When police were called to question him, he vanished. All that remained in his room was a single object, a glass vial filled with black liquid, labeled SG compound number 7, forensic. Tests showed the vial contained human tissue suspended in an unknown preservative. The incident reignited interest in Bellhaven, conspiracy. Theorists claimed the man was Granger himself, somehow preserved by his own experiments. Scientists dismissed it as delusion, but one peculiar fact stood out. The hospital's security footage from that night showed a power surge at exactly 3:03 a.m. When the lights returned, the bed was empty. A week later, 2 hospital staff members reported recurring nightmares. A man whispering, "Freedom through science." Both quit within the month. In the years that followed, online forums began circulating. New theories knocked on that Granger's work had never truly stopped, that modern biotechnologists had rediscovered fragments of his breath of return, but no institution has ever claimed responsibility, and official archives still list his case as historical legend. Yet every decade or so, someone claims to see a lantern in the swamp. Today, the ruins of Bellhaven are little more than Martian memory. The swamp has reclaimed what history wished to forget. Only fragments remain: a rusted scalpel, a nameplate half buried in mud, and the faded echoes of the man who tried to conquer death by trading in souls. Modern historians argue whether Silas Granger was a visionary or a monster, perhaps both. Some see him as a warning of what happens when science loses its morality. Others whisper he succeeded, that somewhere, somehow his consciousness survived. Local folklore says that when the fog rolls thickest over the swamp, you can still hear the low hum of his machines, or the faint, rhythmic pulse of something trying to breathe again. Hunters speak of seeing reflections in the water that don't match their own. Some even claim that the air smells faintly of ether and iron, the scent of old hospitals and unhealed wounds. In 2019, an archaeological team briefly revisited the site with ground-penetrating radar. What they found remains classified, but one anonymous source described a circular structure beneath the soil. Unlike anything built in that era, the project was quietly shut down, and federal agents sealed the area once more. Bellhaven remains off-limits, a scar of American history that refuses to fade. The last words of Granger's surviving journal echo like a curse across time. The body ends, but the experiment does not. Perhaps that's the truest legacy of Silas Granger, a man who believed salvation could be extracted from suffering and who mistook damnation for discovery. And so the swamp keeps its secret. The lanterns still flicker, and somewhere in the dark a voice still murmurs from the mist. Freedom through science.